matter. Like everything about you, this is one specific thing we can harass you on is the thing that matters, because that's how we're right. So we want to use this emotional clause statement for everything, every single thing. The amount of urge I have to yell into this microphone and not have to, like, I'm holding myself back because I could use that instead for my music, right? We're gonna use my brain for music because I want to get into straight. So for those who watched the video and paid attention to the half-hour video of me telling people down, listening to everything that they said that wouldn't happen or wasn't right because they said so, and then me later explaining how it did happen, and not because I said so, but because factually I already predicted it long ago, it still happened. I remember the ones who said, "Oh, by the way, welcome to our first Notebooks video. This isn't going to be too deep of a video." I think it's a regurgitation of things I've been repeating for the last 3 years. Look, my head is steaming right now. My head hurts. I have a migraine. I have searing noise in my ears right now, and I'm keeping calm. My blood pressure is really high right now, but I'm staying calm and I'm keeping myself in composure because I think I've already done that enough recently these weeks. I think I lost my composure for a few things, but at least that was towards my computer and not somebody's face that I want to pelt down into the ground really hard. But you know, I'm non-violent, so I can't do that, and that's illegal, and that is really harmful to do, and violence is not good, and you shouldn't use violence in your protest. But I found if I'm going to regurgitate what I said for the past year and a half, which is not a year and a half anymore, it's more like a year and 3/4. Every single time somebody called me a mental illness, a name, a title, or try to mention any small detail about my life to try to win an argument for like things that I talk about which are not based off of emotions but more like factual events and statements that have been proclaimed and tested and proven and recorded by scientists, mathematicians, and people who are in roles that are in really important roles around the world, which I don't get to be in because in the current planet right now, if you don't have a degree, you can't work in these places. And even if you know how to do art better than some, like say most professionals, right? For example, I'm gonna use art. Even though you know how to draw art really well, there are places that won't let you in no matter if you have no degree. No, you can't get in. Just how that one rolls. Because lots of the university students who I see continue to who go to university, every time I see them do that, I'm like, you're going to a death wish, and you're gonna get actually screwed by the system, and it will be too late when you notice. This happened numerous times. I remember saying this back in 2017. Let me say it without yelling it at my screen because I think I did enough yelling. I did, and my mouth hurts and my gums hurt because I still wear braces and life sucks, but I'm still containing it in. And I'm showing a smile, I'm showing people me dancing, and I'm breathing and living life as it is, even though it's really harsh right now. But I remember back in 2017 telling people, hey, if you go to a university or college, make sure you have backups and make sure you already have something to work on, because if you're relying solely on those only things, right? Which I'm gonna put a little volume just for something to work on. If you only do college and university, don't get a job, but you're a person who gets a job and doesn't go to the college university, you must be some of the most retarded people I've seen, or mentally ill, or extremely unaware of how the world works. So what you're supposed to do in a world that has been completely rigged since the start, by the way, fuck the Betchel family, and I want to say F Bohemian Grove, I want all those people dead, and I want this entire administration to be prosecuted, either executed, and I want harm to be done. But I'm saying that for legal reasons, as a joke, because as much as I want to say something really horrid and really rancid, I'm gonna keep myself contained, and I'm just gonna tell you, look, the system is rigged. Stop telling your cousin, your friend, or your friend's friend that everything's the same, that because it's not happening to you, it's not happening to everybody else. You're stupid, right? You are out of touch, and you are unaware of your surroundings. I've told this for many people over before. What you experience in life is not the same for everybody else. For some reason, that's still not something understood by my own generation, and I will leave a hit on my own generation. I will say, let's fully admit, this generation has some of the most ignorant people I've seen, right? Because not only is the ignorant not just because somebody was rude, it is the ignorance towards the world, right? Now we are finally giving consequence to the world leaders in the world right now who are in places that they shouldn't be in, right? Because we were driven to have to pay attention. And most of us who turned 18 years old during COVID, just like me, for example, who, by the way, only got a job until I was 17 years old, legally, right? Only until I was 17. Most of the people who went into a job, right, had to deal with COVID. When I was 16, I remember trying to get a job and then not have and having forgotten to take a second dose of the vaccine for COVID. It seems that was not well understood, and that seems that lots of people continue to this day misconstrue everything that I do. So, based on many premises from all the discoveries that I went through, all the people that I talked with, from around 2017 to 2026, and I'm going to show images of what is going on because I have a few things to put down and lay down for you, because I want people to start looking around and connecting the dots and trace the trails, because it seemingly is that the world was purposely is supposedly supposed to be rigged. It's just that there's some factors of people that I think we were avoiding and not understanding in the first place. And by the way, my father's next to me, so if you hear me suddenly change topic real fast, he's watching my screen. He's like wondering why I'm talking to a screen again. When you make YouTube videos, you have to talk to yourself for like half an hour before you start putting images on the screen and flashy edits. That's just how YouTube works. Besides that, we need to focus on the senator. Right, we have a senator from Bohemian Grove. We have the entire Project 2025 thing going on. But we can't forget that lots of these things that have been going on that you see on the media are currently lots of distractions. You want to first get yourself over onto Substack and sign yourself up for Substack. That is the only way you'll be able to deal with this fairly, because lots of things are not going right. And every person who I've warned, like people who I've met throughout the decade that I've been at this, let's say starting from 2016, I remember in 2016 and 2017 I said there will be a point where stuff gets so advanced and so extremely like far past legislation, things that will outrun legislation, that at some point, I said this long ago in 2017, 2016, I said at some point, theoretically, if AI was fully automated, right, wouldn't they need an energy source in order to run? But my mind was primitive, right? I was thinking about proto AI. I was thinking about chess bots, chat bots. Back in the day, chat bots were a thing. Excuse my hiccups. So I wondered, how would they power this AI? How would they power artificial intelligence? You've seen it in movies, science fiction movies, and stories and tales, in books, newspapers. Back in the day when we actually read, right? When people used to actually read. That is a really hard thing to see in 2026, where everybody doesn't read anymore. They just let an audiobook read for them, right? Read to them. And just so you all know, most audiobooks in 2026 are either read by somebody who had to spend over 300 hours of their life reading a book, or an AI reading it for you, right? And trust me, the attention span of people now these days, let's fully drop the bomb. This generation certainly does have a shorter attention span, but something that is really problematic is how that attention span is not the main issue that you're looking at the way that you're supposed to look at it. The low attention span is not meant to only cause brain rot or damage or a comedical sense of low intelligence. It is supposedly when you lower the intelligence of a human being and you push him to a corner, like a really violent and unfair and unjustified corner, you must expect that their reaction would be more reactionary rather than complementary to the situation that they are in. This generation, though it is impressive that they are reacting to the injustice going on in the world as it is, righteously, though it looks impressive, something that I don't see many people talk about in a different light is that it is impressive, but that is reactionary. Like, most generations who are like mine look up to their elders, right? They look to our elders or our parents. When our elders say something really shocking or outraging, you cannot forget that there's this really small sliver percentage in our bodies that want to go, is somebody like Donald Trump or somebody like 60-year-old man in the, politics or government says something outrageous, we'd go, wow, this man is based, or this man is like horrifying, or he's like a dumb old man, right? We start using those names. So it's like this little paternal effect on our minds, right? When we're so used to old people being wise or calm or very frail, but really kind-hearted, right? Most of those people were much more runty, right? Back in the day, they were a lot more rambunctious, a lot more active, because there was no such of those things like guardrails that existed in place to keep them back in check. When you see them kind-hearted now, that's because they think their time on the world is over. But when older people in government start saying these things, my generation would often react in a more reactionary tale sense of justice and outrage than somebody stepping down and saying, think about the real issues that are going on. When somebody says, think about the real issues that are going on, I don't think even my generation understands what that means, right? I would first explain to them, okay, what are the actual problems that truly benefit society as a whole that we must put into attention, right? First, before we think about our lives. There are certain things that will get in your life no matter what you do. This is something I do not see many people admitting. You must admit, at some point, as much as you think life is going fine and you think that the government or the world isn't going to affect you, which I've told you many times, and I told all the dozens of thousands of people that I've met in my entire life, yes, thousands of thousands since 2016, I told them, at some point your life will be affected by the outside world without you asking for it, without you knowing about it. It's like a really small thing that inconveniences you, and you don't think too hard about it, but that one thing that conveniences you will continue to arrive every single year until you start noticing how troubling that small inconvenience comes into your life. This is something I did test. From 2016, I had to memorize reactions that arrived from people that I've met since 2016 all the way over to 2026, because I think that's a really good time scale of how to measure things as how it is. So back in the day, we used to never charge to go to parks. We used to not charge so highly on gum or candy, and most people did not ever mention anything to do with wearing anime or otaku culture back in 2016 or 17. There is a different level of outrage for people whenever they did really small mistakes. And back in the day, we didn't take court cases or have numerous YouTubers get sent to court or talk about court. Most of them stayed apolitical for a very long time because nothing really truly got in their way. When I talked to people back in the day, back in 2016, I talked to them about their personal issues or their views on politics back in the day, whatever I could ever get out of middle school students. Just so y'all know, middle school students rarely ever got any teacher to answer those questions for me. I remember telling my civics teacher, telling them back when I was in middle school, I said, what do you think about the current state of politics right now? Is the world doing fine? Be honest. And this was when Donald Trump was elected as president. So this was just like at the beginning, right? At the beginning of, before he did all those horrendous things, right? That I could go on there about. So my civics teacher, of course, he was talking to a middle school student. I was a minor and I was just starting as a teenager. And so saying something really deep and really dark is probably not the wisest thing you can do as a civics teacher. But he knew the type of person, the kid I was, and he knew I was a really, really encapsulated kid who was really into science, space, and science fiction, and all these other things about the world that I was curious about. So I bet he could trust me about these things, and he answered with, Viz, I think the world is not in the best place, but we can do a lot to work on it, to fix it, and make sure that everybody else can live equally, no matter, regardless of their race, gender, or their age, or where they came from. And so when he told me that, I was like, okay, I expected that. He's a civics teacher. Everybody should know that this is common knowledge. It is common knowledge. Everybody should know that being racist is bad. Back in the day, when people were racist, people would often just ignore racists. That was how easy it was to avoid racism. You just ignore them. So, what if I were to tell you that this very instinct to ignore people accidentally became a stigma for my generation when we turned into adults? We began to ignore problems that we thought or perceived to be problematic or got in our way. It's a selfish thing that we did as humans, just like the baby boomers did. Admit it, most of you, whenever you saw somebody who ignored you or you want to ignore badly, maybe they said something that made you look like you were weaker or dumber than they are, I admit you must have ignored them or threatened to punch them or cursed them out and told them to leave the room. I immediately know the names of people who I met who, whenever I outsmarted them in like 3 sentences within the conversation, they would immediately go, "Hey, do not talk to me, don't get close to me, do not talk to me, I want to avoid you, you're saying something rude, get out of the room." So when that instinct is taken into my generation, we end up developing it even more over into the 2020s rather than the early 2010s. You start to notice the trend, because not only did lobbying go up and all of the AI troubles began to finally rise into the public, and we had these AI apps that, by the way, were called proto AI apps, and we had the VTuber explosion. The building era did happen. The building era for VTubers did occur, but I'm not going to sidetrack on this. So, say, what if we were to think that those trends and those reactionary instincts that we have as Generation Z suddenly were adopted into our adult lives? Most of us who are Gen Z were more like kids rather than teenagers. So I'm talking about the Gen Z who were teenagers when I was a teenager. The ones who are kids who are Gen Z, who are now only turning into late teenagers now, you have a different story. Even if you're like 5 to 6 years younger than I am, you have a different story, but everybody else should relate to it, because that's how the algorithm and that's how society was built. Is you were supposed to relate to people who are seen as perceived outcasts. When I saw actual outcasts, most actual outcasts that I got to know when I was a teenager, before I turned into a full-fledged adult and before I even entered high school, most real outcasts normally had a higher awareness of the world and the surroundings around them as they lived. They knew the corruption that went on. They knew bigger words. They knew how to read. They knew how to write. They were able to put down their thoughts down in more sincere ways. And they were not just academically smart, right? No, they were not academically smart. They were just on a higher intuition rate than most normal people. And they were a lot more observant and open-minded. So open-minded people, which I've already talked about in a video long ago, are people who are not what you think are open-minded. Just like how this generation misconstrued what an open-minded person is, I can get something for you to work with. I can explain this down for you. Open-minded people are not the ones that you think are open-minded people. Those people we call are hyperliners. The people that you perceive as a common human being on the surface level of society, you are a hyperliner. A hyperliner is somebody who refuses to engage with society while telling people that they dislike that they are not working in society. So these are the actual hypocrites of the world. The ones who see people as open-minded are the ones who are generally not open-minded. They're hyperliners. They call themselves worthy in society while avoiding society as a whole and telling people that they are not beneficial to society, though they are not involving themselves in society. Without that involvement, they don't have clear examples at adversity built in their head. In order to understand the darkness that is going on, you need to first face adversity at its finest. There are some awful, despicable humans, and most of you got the chance to live this adversity and racism and discrimination early on as a teenager or as a kid. And some of you never got to experience that. So when you think about open-minded, you think somebody who is sexually attractive or emotionally pathologically intelligent based on how much you only know and not how much you think you could know later. This is something that most teenagers continue to misconstrue about what I mean by open-minded. My perception of open-minded is not people who look pathologically intelligent or look or sound emotionally intelligent. There is a lot more that goes on, because then you have to ask them, what religion do you follow? This should be an easy question, easy answer. How old are you? What is your name? What do you want to do when you're grown up? Right? What would you do with that knowledge? What would you talk with? Who would you work with? Are you scared of people who don't look like you? Do you speak their language? Are you scared of listening to music in different language? You have to tell them these really specific questions. If they cannot answer that to you, most chances they will tell you that they listen to 5 to 10 artists online, and they will tell you, I have no other idea who those other artists are. This happened too many times. Throughout the 10 years in span, I've seen people ask them, hey, do you know at least 100 music artists? And they said, I only know 3. I only know 7, maybe 13. Maybe they just know a song from some other one guy, random guy. Which immediately shows that there's a very lack of expansive mindset that's been educated. So something I even proposed back in the day to my teachers. Back in the day, only 2 to 3 of my teachers knew of this, and some of them who I knew in high school, like middle school and high school together, I said, why isn't there a course that is teaching people like me who are a lot more stuck in their place in the world and more naive? Why isn't there a course meant to teach people about digital literacy, digital landscape, digital sociological aspects of education that could be visited for free? If it's so that tech is so available, it's so open that everybody can utilize it, why aren't we teaching people how to use it? For example, most Generation Z were never told or taught how to deal with the internet whenever they turn into adults, because the internet was built so recently, around 3 decades old, technically 3 decades old, since the 1990s. I couldn't say 4 decades yet because we had to get to the 2030s, but it was on 3 decades. So nobody ever really was prepared since the start on how to deal with the internet. If they started with the internet as a child, right, and then turned into an adult as the internet progressed. So nobody ever really taught anybody how to prepare for the internet whenever they grew up with the internet and turned into an adult with the internet. This was not a thing back in the 1900s. You didn't see that. It was not really something people thought of. And now we have systems that, if only we were thinking more ahead of our time. Something that I noticed is also AI. AI, nobody ever thought ahead of time, would it be that if theoretically AI would be able to allow people to commit fraud on a larger scale? If the power of information is so high, wouldn't you expect new AIs be invented and built ahead of time, right, before it happens, that are meant to scrape data? If a computer is merely a source, right, and a transmittory type of object, right, even though it's probably not a real word, but I hope you know what I mean. If it is an object that can clearly send signals to another source, to another computer who receives the message or signal or the data or whatever frequency that has arrived to that computer, whenever it goes to the internet, uploads and gets to the other side, right, normally you would think, okay, if it is that easy to send information to the other side on another computer, you would expect there'd be more security clearance and more systems built to avoid AI stealing data. If data being stolen was already a thing since around like the 1950s, 1960s, since the music industry came to be about and all these other things, blah blah blah. I can go on about stolen record data, falsified record data. I can go on there, but Why aren't we doing the same for AI? And previously, I remember mentioning back a long time ago, hey, theoretically, if AI got advanced enough, would you think it'd steal data? Would you think it at some point operate weapons? It is already being used for weapons. AI now is being used for AI war drones. So how can nobody at least put in the mind, hey, how fast does it take for somebody to invent AI war drones? War drones powered by AI. Wouldn't it just be an antenna, right? And receiving signals, being told, and this is before I knew how AI worked properly. Wouldn't it be like, for example, an AI war drone needs signals, it needs commands, it needs something to tell it that you need to go over to this camp or this fortress that needs to be taken down, or maybe they need to look around and surveil the area. So wouldn't it need wouldn't it need commands? So what if the commands came from an AI that automated the entire process? Would that take energy? Just like how when we transmit data across through computers or networks, theoretically, wouldn't it just be that an AI war drone would just need only transmissions, codes, and specific automated processes in order for it to operate on its own? If a human can do that, and we already back in the day had been already able, we were already able to make drones. We made war drones. AI operated war drones. Different thing, right? Still the same concept. It's just another function of control. Just as people are confidently scraping and frauding all of art and music, theoretically, how did nobody see that at one point AI would be so advanced? Wouldn't somebody want to commit fraud if they were giving a chance? There are billions of humans in this world. At some point, there's going to be 1,000+ people who would say we can commit fraud with AI, and nobody will question it. Why? Because then nobody thought that far through. In 2022, absolutely nobody actually cared about AI as much at all. 2021, 2022, everybody was so focused on COVID. When AI was still being built, we still had AI services, proto AI services around since 2020, 2021. So you all know, because I've used AI all the way back then before all of you knew about it. Nobody was paying attention to the constant evolutions OpenAI, DALL-E, and all these other companies were doing, right? Whenever they started inventing on these very small, primitive proto-AI databases. It is a very complicated, algorithmically driven function that was automated, and to power it, they just need a very powerful source of data and energy. And so that's all I had in my head back in the day before I knew about OpenAI and all this stuff. So before I even knew of these companies, at least somebody who put a little thought into it would go, theoretically this and that, right? Place the same types of answers that would arrive, but nobody really mentioned it. And some people who were early birds, just like I was, we were drowned in the excessive media that were people talking about COVID and infections or quarantine or trends. And while everybody was focusing on that, my generation failed as a whole to first notice early on as we were turning into adults, because by then in 2020, 2021, we were only focused on ourselves in our dating lives, or maybe working to wanting to get a job at 16, in some places 15 years old, but legally it is 16 and only 16 and above. We were thinking about other things while we were ignoring the underlying dangers that have arrived. That if one somebody like say have if somebody like me was able to rise to that point in conversation about AI without even knowing that AI was being built already, without knowing all the major giants behind it, if I was able to get to that conclusion just by thinking about it a little harder, how come nobody else have went that direction either? And yes, there have been a few people, but not enough people, and so we were drowned by the constant clutter of trends, memes, and dances that were being posted online. So whenever we started ignoring that, and basically we started being the very baby boomer generation, except rather than being really dominant about it, we became really recessive to the reaction that we were supposed to put in way before all of this chaos and panic. And once Donald Trump took power, right after he obviously rigged the election, which has not been proven that Elon Musk rigged all of the Texas votes, right? He did rig all the Texas votes. Thank goodness somebody did the investigation, and thank goodness we saw more investigations appearing that ballot measures were rigged and affected and completely overturned. We knew that the very same that we basically, as a generation my own, we were really recessive on the reaction, and rather than doing more physical action about it in 2023, we decided to go, let's try it and let's make content. And so we started making content about the very thing that you're looking at right now. We decided to sensationalize and romanticize AI, TikTok, conversation. We romanticized reproductive things. We romanticized emo girls or sexual aspects of trends like looks, bikinis, or women or rappers going on about drugs and psychedelics. We started to romanticize all of those really critical things to pass a point and say that freedom of expression is still fine, right? Yeah, it was still fine. But all we did was basically put out all sorts of outrageous contents in 2023, only to then later find out, oh, we basically ranted in the form of a large wave of content showing how explicit we can get as a Generation Z, only to then later discover, once AI finally came into the full-on mainstream world across the entire world, once we finally discovered that, we were suddenly offended by an AI or multiple AI services that were able to poorly replicate what we can do outrageously as a human species, especially in Generation Z. The ones that usually do have a reactionary reaction to when the AI first came to be about, along with all these other language models and all of these other things to do with politics, right? And once Elon Musk did his thing and Donald Trump did his thing, all these the court packings that occurred and all the IPACs and all the people involved with the Bohemian Grove, all the people involved with BlackRock and all these huge other Vanguard assistants and all. I could talk about Visa Massacre and all that. Peter Thiel as well. By the way, fuck you, Peter Thiel. Whenever that started happening, we were suddenly enraged by something that was so simplistic and so bland, right? We decided to get outraged by something that had absolutely no emotion and soul into it, and rather than playing the ignoring victim of the conversation in the example of how things were going, we decided to finally put action only until something started to totally replicate the outrage that we caused in 2023. When that finally began to happen, you start to notice why I'm so disappointed. And my generation, sometimes, not always, because this generation is doing lots of cool things, absolutely true, we did do a lot of bad things. All generations will make mistakes in different form of way. For us, we decided to ignore all of the outrage that went on, and we didn't act on it. We just kind of made content, and that was a way of coping and dealing with controversy. And so when AI finally began to poorly replicate the outrage that we caused as a Generation Z, once we started, entering our 20s, which most Generation Z should be entering their 20s by now, and some of them are still kids, but very barely now. We now are shocked and outraged by something poorly replicating our outrage that we caused. The explicit contents we invented. We sensationalized that content. And now we're bothered by an AI service or numerous accounts of companies doing this, trying to forcefully replicate what we were doing way better than they could. And so they had to resort to an automated process of AI, the use of AI, in creative steps in order to cause outrage for our generation. Saying, well, if we can't have the skills you have and we CEOs are kind of falling behind, we'll just create AI services that compete with you guys and poorly replicate your work and only to then get better at replicating that outrageous work that we did. And when most of us played the ignorant type of card that we had done as kids to, adversity, discrimination, and racism, we were too lenient on ignorance, right? Ignorance is bliss. It actually causes death. So you all know, ignoring things do not always cause them to go away. That's a lesson learned that my generation had to learn the really hard way. You ignore something, but you can't expect it to go away. If it doesn't go your way, don't complain about it resurfacing later as a poorly done version done by a greedy CEO trying to get a laugh at you. If now that process is fully automated and no government's able to catch up and legislation is behind, this outrage will continue in the cycle until this very generation says, you know what, we have to proactively pursue aggressive court cases, aggressive actions, aggressive regulations. We need to be extremely aggressive, right? But we can't. The violence thing only came to be for me even until now, because at the moment, if I had engaged in violence in 2025 or 2026, even after knowing that the world basically just ignored all of the dangerous things, right? We basically all ignored all the signs of danger that were coming to be, that would later pop up now, 5 years later. Even after I knew that engaging in violence and deciding to protest in a way that might hurt people, or like say attack buildings or burn them and light them on fire, there was a time where I actually did think of doing something more dangerous, and I decided to not do it. Because I knew that if I had engaged in it, I'm basically only lighting the fire, right? You don't combat outrage with something more outrageous, right? And this generation decided to mock the older generation about their incompetence. Yes, we decided to mock the previous generations, 2 generations before, and we mocked them for their incompetence. We mocked them. This is the result. You mocked a bunch of old people. You mocked a bunch of middle-aged men and women who are hardworking adults who, yes, did leave us this corrupt world, but we decided to mock them, and rather than giving them full-on reasons, solid reasons to solve their issues with, we mocked them, we ignored them, and we left them be. And as we did it, they built the very foundations of all the corruption that was going on. The ones who were able to use their brain to invent something so awful and disgusting, which is AI in the creative industry, weaponry powered by AI, spy AI surveillance, and all these other things I could list on forever. Even the very inflation of our grocery prices is now fully adjusted by AI. So we mocked people back in the day for working normal class jobs, right? The very toll and price of mocking these very people, ones who spent their time studying, the ones who were around since the 80s and 90s. Well, this is the way of them saying thank you. I think it's a really huge psychological aspect that kind of snowballed after a decade, because I can go on all day about the current clothing trend, and you can see how it represents when people started wearing more black in 2020. In 2023, 2022, there was more people wearing black as their main colors, and in 2025, 2026, you see people wearing black again. You saw this in 2017-18 because that's when Trump was doing all those things. So those things were just out of rebellion. Outcasts, people who felt like they weren't understood by society, rejected, who had a perception that they were rejected by society. And so in that turmoil, they went over to violence. Violence, finding a girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever, going gay or lesbian, going out on the pride flags, smoking or vaping while they were still teenagers, going outside and doing rebellious things. This is why you see most snap when they're 15 years old. 15 years old is that very pivoting age, usually when people snap, right? When they're now half aware of how the world works. Now that we're adults, we're now a little more aware, and some of us think it's hard to ignore everything. So I know certain people out who I know who are right now ignoring everything. Yes, they are ignoring everything still, even after 3/4 years, right, of peer abuse, peer corruption, peer scandals, peer crimes being committed, even crimes against humanity, as stated factually by I saw some investigation they did into ICE and all the Epstein files that's been going on, and it says that yes, they were able to confirm lots of what they found were crimes against humanity, as in international crimes. So I hope that opens your eyes a little bit. As much as how all of those things are going on, people are being forced to go into war, or maybe we're getting close to war, a major war rather than like a proxy war. This is a lesson learned. As much as somebody wants to ignore, it's not going to go away. It is not going to go your way. You need a group of people who are like me, or somebody similar to me, to get those things away from you. As much as most of you don't want to admit it, the world does not revolve around you. Nobody is always going to say yes all the time. Nobody else, as much as you want to ignore them, disappears from your life. They don't always disappear from your life. As much as you want to think they're not there, they're still there. As much as you want to put them to the side and focus on other things, they will still exist. They will exist, and they will find ways to make you suffer. When you give them leeway and you put no more eyes on top of them, think about the secondary effects of giving the perception of being failed by society. You resort to violence, revenge, hatred, and a forceful understanding of a public you choose to drag along with you. That is where people go to when people start to ignore people that think are problematic. When they get ignored, those people that you very ignore in your life, most chances either they go to jail, are alive, or they invent something while you don't care about it, right? You just say, oh, they don't exist anymore, I ignored her, or I ignored my ex, or whatever. Where are they going? You don't know where they go. What if by chance one of them becomes the very next entrepreneur, tech CEO, billionaire, and invents the very thing that you hate today? And because you don't watch where they go, you don't know until you see a photo and their name online being the representative of OpenAI. There are people who I know, I wish I knew, like in person, personally, who work at these companies, and I got intel from Africa that Africa is, basically enslaving people to work for AI data centers. Lots of those people who I would think that are not relevant to me because maybe they're problematic people, I want to ignore them. They didn't disappear. They end up getting a job in an AI data center, right, area. They got a job in a data center, and now they are contributing to the pollution that is going on. So in the result of you ignoring them and not watching where they go, preventing anything, they took over a position in a data center that is resulting in the literal expansion of pollution on the world. A lot of things are connected. Besides that, stay safe out there. Know what you know. Remain peaceful. Don't lose your mind. We need informed leaders out there. In a world where now facts are considered seen as a form of harassment for some reason. What you say about me is what you say about society. As always, been at this for 8 years. By the way, happy 8th anniversary to my first video. There's more I can say, but I can't. This is a podcast style thing. Get used to it. Stay safe out there. Don't be a buffoon. Don't do stupid things. Your parents will not always give you punishments for that. And so that's all I have to say. Literally.